the day, but I know that many of you have been up for a long time going and watching the Big Five. I actually decided I needed to sleep some more after the party last night. So I'm going to give a kind of two talks. I'm going to start by giving a fairly generic introductory description of of what aging is, what we might be able to do about it, and how it's going. So the kind of talk that I would give to any audience, really, that is new to this. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about Africa and what Africans can do in this area. I am so excited to be here and to be helping to make this conference such a success, because I believe that now is the time for Africans to start getting properly involved with this. Not loud enough? Should I be closer to the microphone? Okay, I can do that. So I think I would just start by talking a little bit about the economic aspects of aging. Now, of course, we all know that life expectancy has been increasing across the whole world for quite some time, at different rates in different parts of the world, of course, and I'll come back to that later when I start focusing on Africa. But if we just look for illustration at the USA, this is what we can see over the past century or more. This is just showing the proportion of the population in the USA that was over the age of 65, and it's gone up and up. And of course, this is a cause for celebration. It's a real success story because it has happened as a result of progress in medicine and in prosperity that has reduced and reduced and reduced the number of people who die at an early age, in infancy or in early life. So the average lifespan has gone up. But of course, there's also a side effect of that, which is that more and more people are living long enough to suffer from the health problems of late life, the diseases of old age. And the biggest difference when we look at it from an economic point of view, or indeed from a humanitarian point of view, is that the health problems of late life kill you slowly. If you get malaria or tuberculosis or any of the things that used to kill so many people in the West 200 years ago and still kill a lot of people in sub-Saharan Africa now, if you get those things, you tend to either recover or you die quickly. But if you have Alzheimer's disease or cancer or heart disease or type 2 diabetes, these are things which are progressive, chronic conditions in which you get gradually sicker and sicker and sicker before you die. So from an economic perspective, that's really, really difficult to manage. This again is just an illustration from the USA, and over a period of only 50 years, from 1960 through to 2010. So the red line is the growth of the US economy during that period, and the blue line is the growth in expenditure on medical care in the USA during that period. And looked at that way, well, okay, obviously the medical care is a lot less, but it's terrifying when you divide the red line by the blue line and you ask for the proportion of the US economy that goes on medical care. So just in that 50-year period, that's the green line, it went up from 5% to 18%. So from a Western perspective, this is a huge part of the conversation about aging, the economic conversation. And that's what's coming elsewhere in the world. So now I'm going to talk about the biology of aging. I'm mostly a biologist. I do a lot of advocacy, but I got here by making progress on the biology of aging. So that's what I'm going to talk about for a moment. So many people think that aging is a mystery, that somehow we don't understand anything about what aging really is. And that's just completely not true. We understand pretty well what aging is, and not only that, we understand it well enough that it's something that I can explain easily to non-biologists, to a general audience. So that's what I'm going to do. Aging can be described in just 3 words. Metabolism is the word that biologists use when they talk about the network of processes that keep us alive from one day to the next. The things that the body has to do to make sure that we don't fall apart. That's metabolism. And of course it goes on all throughout our life by definition, starting from conception. Now the thing about metabolism is that it creates changes to the molecular and cellular structure and composition of the body. And those changes are cumulative, they're progressive. Now the body is set up so as to not care about those changes for a while. Those changes accumulate and accumulate, and until middle age or later, there's really no consequence of that. But eventually there is, because the amount of those changes gets to a point that is beyond what the body is set up to tolerate. And that's why those changes can be called damage, because eventually they are harmful. They are harmful late in life, and of course that's what the pathology word is. It is the word to encompass all of the health problems that affect you when you were born a long time ago. So, what we would like to do, of course, is to separate metabolism from pathology, to develop medicines, develop technologies that will allow us to continue being alive, in other words, performing metabolism, right, without eventually getting sick, the pathologies. So how do we do that? How would we separate metabolism from pathology? Well, one way might be to separate damage from pathology, to somehow allow people to carry on being fully functional, just like young adults, even though they have a lot of damage in their bodies. But that's pretty obviously not going to happen, right? Because by definition, damage causes the pathologies. So if the damage is continuing to accumulate, it's going to become progressively harder and harder to stop it from causing us to be sick. And that's why geriatric medicine doesn't work. It's kind of almost a definitional thing that it's going to become progressively less effective as the person gets older. And there's another problem with geriatric medicine, which is that so many things go wrong with us late in life. You're not supposed to be able to read this slide, don't worry. The idea here is simply, so many things go wrong, and they go wrong at more or less the same time. So they affect each other, and that makes it even worse. So a lot of people think that that's why medicine has made so little progress against aging. There's just, the complexity is overwhelming. That is part of the problem, but the main problem is that if you're trying to address something that is the consequence of something that's accumulating, then you're never going to succeed anyway. All right, so I'm not the first person to point this out. More than a century ago, a few people started to realise that geriatric medicine was never going to work. And they said, well, okay, we'd better try to be more preventative and kind of separate metabolism from pathology at an earlier stage in the chain of events by separating metabolism from damage. That would work in principle. And the inspiration for this approach was the living world. The fact that in the living world we see that different species have very, very, very different rates of aging, right? So maybe we could learn from that. Maybe we could figure out why they have different rates, and we could extrapolate from there to develop medicines that would slow down the rate at which metabolism creates damage. And that would be good, it would delay the age at which there is enough damage to make us sick, to cause pathologies. It would only be effective if we start slowing down the creation of damage at an early age, You know, if you start when people are already in middle age, they've already got most of the damage that they need in order to get sick, then you don't get much benefit from that kind of approach. But hey, it's better than nothing. But unfortunately, that too has been completely, utterly unsuccessful in actually keeping people healthier for longer and, you know, even slightly separating metabolism from pathology. And this is why it's complexity again. This is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how the body works, how metabolism works. And I mean, anyone here who's ever written software, you can immediately see this is the ultimate nightmare of uncommented spaghetti code. There is just no way in hell that we are ever going to be able to, you know, disentangle this and stop our metabolism from doing the thing we don't want it to do, the creation of damage, without at the same time having unintended consequences and stopping it from doing the stuff we need it to do to keep us alive. Not going to happen. And by about the 1960s, 70s, people who studied the biology of aging had realized this. They had understood that it was just never going to happen. And it became forbidden to even talk about doing anything about aging. Aging had become like earthquakes. You know, people who study earthquakes, they know that earthquakes are bad for you, but they don't have any intention or aspiration to ever do anything about them, right, to stop them from happening. You just like figure out where they're going to happen and try and get away in time, right? It was like that. And that's, when I came into the field in the 1990s, it was just like so depressing. Everyone had given up. But they shouldn't have, because it turns out that there is a third, completely different way to separate metabolism from pathology. I've shown you that we can't do it by separating damage from pathology, and we also can't do it by separating metabolism from damage. But maybe we can do it by periodically repairing the damage. If we just let metabolism create damage at the normal rate, then we don't have to worry about, you know, how it does it. We don't have to understand aging, we don't have to manipulate metabolism. And if we then repair the damage every so often, before it gets to the level of abundance that makes us sick, then we don't have to worry about how it makes us sick either. So this is kind of a technological approach, an engineering approach to the job. And that's actually the right way to be thinking about it. Because the human body, let's face it, the human body is a machine. It's a really, really complicated machine, but it's still a machine. And therefore, we should be able to postpone its decline, you know, its loss of function, by the same kind of approach that works for simple man-made machines. And that's exactly what we do. Here's a machine that's more than 100 years old, and the thing is, it didn't get that way by being designed to last 100 years. It got that way by preventative maintenance. It was probably designed to last only 10 years or 15, but because its owners fell in love with it and have done comprehensive, periodic, preventative maintenance on it for its whole life, it's working just as well as the day it was built. So that is the goal for the human body as well, to rejuvenate the body, to keep it, to do comprehensive preventative maintenance on it. And 20 or so years ago, I realised this, and I proposed a detailed plan for how to go about it. I realised that all of the types of damage that the body accumulates, all of these molecular and cellular changes that eventually make us sick, can be classified into a very manageable number of categories, just 7 categories. Here they are, on the left-hand side of this slide. And I won't go through the whole thing in detail, but the purpose of this classification is because each category has a corresponding approach to actually doing this preventative maintenance, to actually repairing the type of damage, the category of damage. And each of these things is a very realistic, very foreseeable research program Many of them were, well, a couple of them were already making good progress 20 years ago when I started thinking this way, and they're all making great progress now. So, and the foundation that I created has played a role in that, but we're not the only ones by any means. For the first 10 years of this idea, most of the work that I had to do was just to persuade other experts that it was even a good idea, because it was a big, big shift of thinking. People didn't think this way at all until 20 years ago. But 10 years ago or so, that was all over. This is a paper that came out in 2013, and, well, maybe their graphics were a bit better than mine, but the fact is it's the exact same idea, and it was published in a top journal by very mainstream people, and so this is great. I never need to justify this damage repair approach to people anymore, to experts. So that's great. We've got this divide and conquer damage repair approach, and the expert community believes that it is the way to go. So, well, what does that actually mean in terms of where we are today? I created this foundation, which is a non-profit, a research foundation funded by philanthropy, by people just giving us money. And we did some pretty good work on a number of these areas. I don't seem to have the slide showing our publications, but we've published various important results in these areas. And we've also, in the past 5 or 6 years, got to the point where we can actually create companies in this space. So it's not just a non-profit enterprise anymore. There is a real industry here where investors are coming along. All of the companies I've listed here were created by us as spin-outs of projects that we had worked on for a long time beforehand. And, of course, investors tend to write bigger checks than donors do. So this has accelerated the work. Better than that, it's not just our work that is going well and going into the private sector. This is a ridiculously incomplete list from a couple of years ago of some of the early companies in this space, but there's a couple of hundred companies at least now working in rejuvenation biotechnology, the general approach to addressing aging by repairing types of damage. So it's extremely heartening that this has really taken off. There is a long way to go, but progress is much faster than it used to be in all of these areas. One thing I'd like to mention here is the relevance of COVID. Of course, COVID has changed everybody's lives. This is the first time that I've been abroad, actually, out of the USA since the pandemic began. And there are a few things to mention here in relation to coming back to the economics of aging and the politics of aging, for that matter. The fact that COVID is very much an age-related disease is quite important. Of course, most infections, nearly all infections, are much worse for the elderly than they are for young adults, but COVID is an extreme example of that. And the thing is that COVID caused the whole world to basically shut down. And that was extremely damaging for the quality of life of young people around the world, as well as older people. So that's pretty good news from a political perspective, because it says that it's not necessarily a bad idea from an electoral perspective to put money into helping older people to be healthier. I think for a long time politicians have said, well, there's no votes in this. So they haven't been enthusiastic about putting money into this. But that's not really true anymore. So I'm going to start now talking about things other than science. I have been getting out there on stage and on camera talking about this for probably 17, 18 years now. And of course, I'm a biologist, so I like to talk about where we're going on the technology. I like to get into the details of that. But in practice, I find that I have to spend most of my time justifying why this is worth doing at all, which is completely crazy to me, but there it is. In particular, I have to keep explaining to people that all this is medical research. But what we're doing is we're trying to keep people healthy. And that does mean that, to the extent that we succeed, people will live longer. And somehow that's a problem for a lot of people. People would prefer us to keep people healthy, but not to make them live longer. And I think that's completely insane. I think that living longer is a side effect of staying healthy longer, but it's a damn good side effect. So I have to answer questions like this. People will say, oh dear, where will we put all the people? Or they'll say, well, won't it only be for the rich? Or won't dictators live forever? Or they'll even say things like, won't we get bored of living so long? Or, doesn't death give meaning to life? And, I guess I've got used to this over the years. But at the end of the day, you just have to remind people that this is actually just medical research. If you don't think that Alzheimer's is a good thing, and you don't think that cancer is a good thing, then there's no reason to think that aging is a good thing either. It's that simple. But I have to still drum this into people all the time. So now I'm going to start talking specifically about Africa, because the conversations that I have of this kind in America or in Western Europe are very frustrating, but I don't think they are all that universal. When I go to Russia, it's a very different situation. Somehow the Russians don't have this hang-up about living a long time. They're perfectly comfortable with the idea of the side effects, and so they're much more positive about this work. And I have a feeling Africa may be able to be the same way, because you're starting from the right place. First thing to recognise is how rapidly sub-Saharan Africa is getting to have this as a problem. At the beginning of my talk, I spoke about how in America we used to have a life expectancy even only 150 years ago, which was less than the life expectancy in sub-Saharan Africa today. And as time has gone on and life expectancy has gone up in the West, it has resulted in an epidemic of age-related diseases. So, unless we do something about aging, that is the future of Africa. And I think that would be a bad thing. So let's fix that. Aging is already Africa's #1 health problem. Jose Cordero mentioned that yesterday morning. So really the question is, what should the priorities be in Africa in relation to aging? And I think one thing that struck me a lot yesterday was that there was a lot of talk about Africa catching up with the West and with the industrialized world. But I want to go further than that. I think, you can think about catching up, but also you can think about being an equal partner with the rest of the world in this crusade. And of course, the best way to explain why that's the right way to think is that it's a universal crusade. It doesn't matter how technologically advanced a country is, it doesn't matter how wealthy a country is, everyone still has aging right now. Aging is the same for everybody right now. And so we're all in this together. And so I want to think about a lot of the aspects of this from the point of view of people like you, people who are relatively new to this whole topic and who want to think about how best to contribute, how best to be part of the crusade. One thing to be very clear about is that the community in the industrialized world that are working on longevity is an extremely, exceptionally collaborative community. I already spoke about how the private sector is getting heavily involved now in longevity, and some of you may have heard that really big companies are getting involved. Really wealthy people. Jeff Bezos, the second wealthiest person in the world, put billions of dollars into a new company just the past year. The Saudi royal family are doing so. Many people are doing this. But pretty much everybody in the longevity community is talking to everybody else, sharing ideas, sharing efforts. It's much more collaborative than you would expect. You'd expect it to have become very competitive by now. And part of that is because people see that this is just at the beginning of a huge revolution for humanity. And so they're thinking, well, the more we help each other, the more rapidly that revolution will come and the more prosperous everyone's going to be. Plus also, even the people who are investors, the people who want to make money, they're also human beings. And they're nice people. There's just very widespread community spirit, esprit de corps. So it's much more collaborative than you might expect. And of course, if that's true in the industrialized world, it can be true in the whole world. So you can expect that as you get involved in the global conversation about this topic, that it will be a very friendly conversation. You will be meeting with and conversing with like-minded people. The next thing I wanted to mention was something that came to me on my way here from Johannesburg Airport, which I think it's worth mentioning, even though it's just one illustration of the general point I want to make. Everyone has different skills. One of the biggest achievements that I feel I've made over the past 15 years or so, since the science of rejuvenation was more or less established, was I've been very effective at building this community, at bringing the right people together. And that usually means bringing people together who have different skills and whose skills can help each other. Now, the thing that struck me on my way here was the lady who was driving me, who was part of the Northwest Tourist Board, she stopped at, I think it was a toll booth, and spoke in some language other than English to the person in the toll booth. And I asked her, how many languages does she speak? And she said 4. And I said, that's really impressive. And then I said, what are they? And she immediately listed 7, as if she was just being too modest the first time. I asked a bit more about that. I said, like, do most people in South Africa or in Africa in general? So the thing is, in the industrialized world, most people are like me in terms of languages. I speak English, and that's all. I can just about make myself understood in French if I really have to, but that's it. And most people are like that. Most people whose first language is English, they just don't care enough. But you have a whole different mental skill set. I'm sure all of you know that if you speak 2 languages, then in general, learning a 3rd language is far easier than if you start out only learning 1 language as a kid and you have to learn a 2nd language. That takes far longer. So, that flexibility of mental skills is something that not enough people in the industrialized world have. And I began to realize it's really common in Africa. That my driver the day before yesterday said, you have to speak a lot of languages in Africa in order to get along. And this is a huge advantage that people can use. It's just an example, of course. It's just one thing that you can start from if you look at what Africans can contribute to the global crusade against aging. Another thing is coming back to what I was saying a few minutes ago about the difference between catching up and being an equal partner. I don't object to thinking in terms of and focusing on the catching up part, because that kind of promotes a determination to bring about change. I've always had a determination to change the world, to make the world a better place for everybody, but most people in the industrialized world don't think like me. And I think people who have grown up in an underprivileged environment relative to other countries maybe, they find it easier to have that determination that allows this to really happen. Another thing I want to talk about, again, comes back to the fact that Africa is catching up. At the moment, since life expectancy in Africa is lower than in the industrialized world, that means, of course, a higher proportion of people are young adults. And youth means eagerness and enthusiasm to learn, which is, of course, an absolute essential for doing anything to change the world. And I'm sure that Afrolongevity is going to be emphasizing education as a huge part of what it does going forward. Then also to innovate, to actually develop the changes that the world needs. Innovation is something that really, in general, is done by young people. And of course to aim high. One thing that I find so depressing about most people my age in the Western world is they have been ground down by just having a lifetime of not achieving their goals. And they've forgotten how to aim high. And, so the younger you are, the easier it is to do that, I guess, and just to live life to the full. So I think the simple fact that a higher proportion of Africans are young adults is another huge advantage that this continent has to be an equal partner. So the last thing I wanted to say is to, rather than to talk about the contrast between Africa and the industrialized world, to talk about what we already have in common. First of all, we have leaders. So I feel that, what I do in going out on stage and on camera all the time and trying to inspire people is I'm showing leadership. I'm being strong and passionate. I show my passion very, powerfully. Just like Jose did yesterday morning. I try to be a human being with proper emotions and not just a robot. And I think we have that with Osi and Brenda and the group here. The leadership of Afrolongevity has inspired me to come here and give my support to this new initiative. And really, they got me here on merit. I'm here because I was inspired. And, at the end of the day, the other fundamental, really just mundane thing that we have in common is that we're all made of the same stuff. We're all falling apart, slowly, and we don't like it. None of us like it. So, we've all got that. We've all got that fundamental problem that we don't like, but not for long. So I'll just stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions.